We'll talk about why is mastering so important, why is mastering part of the creative process, and how you can get your music onto vinyl. Who can talk better about it than LUPO? Welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
Why mastering? Why can't I just download some Wave plugins and they do the job, and then I can save a lot of money?
I have to say, you can do that. Why not? Just do it. Joe Meek says, if it sounds right, it's right. The problem is you have to know what is right and what you want to have and what the music is to be used for. From the aesthetical perspective, you can do everything. From a technical perspective, it has to suit the media, of course. Mm-hmm. On this kind of media, you can put everything. It can sound like shit. Mm-hmm. And that's also part of the problem sometimes, because the democracy in music production is a really, really great thing. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, the problem is that everybody with who is able to control a computer, to work with a computer, can do tracks after installing OS X, for example, with GarageBand. And he can upload it to, he can use the plugin, he can upload it to Beatport, iTunes, wherever. But that doesn't mean that it sounds good, despite of the music. And there comes the mastering engineer in. So if you're really sure what you're doing, why not doing self-mastering?
But those people, they basically come to you and say, oh, please make it as loud as possible.
So I have clients which I know they want to have it as loud as possible, and I try to make it loud in a way I can agree to. But I see in the last couple of years, I would say already, so where the term loudness war went in, that more and more people try to avoid these loudness. And if you show them the difference between a file which is heavily compressed and another file which has still his attacks, his overtones, so like this you preserve the overtones, and that basically sounds louder than the actual loud track, because it's just simple, because where there is no quiet, there can't be no loud.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, usually the mastering equipment, or like really good equipment, is super expensive. So is there one piece of equipment where you can say this doesn't really cost that much, but it really improves your sound a lot already?
I mean, it's the man, not the machine. And in my opinion, you can do every equipment you find laying around to sweeten your sound, to change your sound, to reach the target you would like to have. And of course, there are good processors. I think about an API 2500, which is a really inexpensive, really good compressor, for example. And of course, we also use expensive mastering gear, but more or less we also just cook with water.
What's the ideal track that you're looking for? If you tell your clients, do you tell them leave it as flat as possible? No.
As flat?
No. I mean, don't use any compression, or what should they do? What's important?
Actually, think about the music being authentic. So just do your thing without thinking about the mastering or about the process. Just do your music, and then and for me it's important also, because when I get the track and I try to get an idea what it is all about, and if you treat your track in a way which is half my job, then I get a total different idea of your track. And for me, it's important to know, what's to get the intention, to get the idea, to work on it. No limiting on the track, things like that. That's really technical. No dithering, because that's a thing I do later on. Deliver the track in the original sample rate and bit depths, so no conversion before I get the tracks.
Which sample rate would you prefer?
The highest.
The highest as
Yeah.
possible. Okay.
Yeah. Or actually the one you are working in. So it doesn't make sense if you work in 16-bit and then you deliver the tracks in 24-bit, because within this 24-bit container you still have the 16-bit, so it doesn't make sense. A lot of people ask about the headroom. So yeah, I heard I shouldn't record the track too hard, so I should have headroom. So how much do you want? Yeah, I say yeah, about -3 dB, for example, and then I get the track which is totally squashed, and then level to -3 dB. So often I realize that people don't understand the difference between level and dynamic, and also loudness, to come back to this. So I can have a track with a really huge dynamic, but with also a huge loudness. Loudness means just the perception of how loud the track is perceived. Dynamic is the difference between the loudest tone and the lowest tone. Yeah, and that's important. So when it's about delivering the right track, so I need enough dynamic.
So talking about the process, a client gives you a tune. What's the first thing that you do?
The first thing is actually talking to the client, listening to the track. Skipping, I mean, saying I have, it's most of the time it's not only one track, it's two or maybe an album. So I skip through the whole album. I try to get an idea of the tracks, of the idea of the album, of the track listing also. If you have your first mastering session, I would always recommend to attend the session. That's always good for you, for your new mixes, for the result of the first mastering, for the engineer. If you think about to work on a long-term base, that you both know what you agree with, so you also have to find a base about the communication. So let's say you want to have a warm track. And
how much do you think it's a creative process?
Sometimes it's kind of remixing the whole thing, so really make it totally different. It's also because of different from the earlier times when people get in the studio recording, having a mixing engineer, having a producer, things like that. So the tracks you get, they are already in a way they should be. Today you have people mixing in the box and trusting you as the mastering engineer that it gets right at the end.
But people can also come with an Ableton Live file to you, and you help them with the mix down as well?
That's possible. That's usually not part of the mastering session, but that's possible. I mean, usually I ask the people to contact me in front, of course, and to send me files in front. It comes to the second point about delivering files. If you are unsure about how to deliver the files or how to do the mix right, or if you I have some clients which are really good in what they do, and then they start to work with vocals or with instruments they usually don't use. So it's, for example, when it's about the vocals, it's interesting to get the tracks delivered in the way that I have the mixed instrumental and then just the vocal. And so I can process the vocal the way it should be. So I can step one step into the mixing process. A lot of people, because of small speakers at home or having not the right environment, are unsure about the bass, the amount of bass in the mix. In their environment, I have an idea how it sounds right within their environment. So it's nice to get, for example, 3 versions of that track. So one with bass or vocal in the other example, vocal up, vocal normal as it sounds good for them, and vocal a little bit down, so I can decide how it works, and with the bass or other instruments the same. Okay. And then at the end it ends up to so-called stem mixes, which is a nice thing, so that I get all the mixing groups, so like drums, musical instruments, vocals, maybe effects and things. So I can also doing a summing within the mastering, and if something happens with the mix, I can really get further into the mix.
Okay.
So if we were to deliver files to you of different stems, would we deliver them with the effects applied, like send effects applied, or would we say these are the send buses that we use, and here's just the raw bus audio?
Of course, I need the effects applied. a bit it depends also on the facts, on the mix. It's up to you in the mix, or if you want to send me the stereo mix in front, so I can give you my advice to it. But usually the mixes are applied to the individual track, and just rarely the people have the effects on a different bus. It both makes sense, really depends on the mix.
Okay, and then if you get the stems, would you rather have them normalized or as they are in the mix?
No, in the mix. And then that's another thing about normalizing and also having a limiter. I know a lot of people mixing with a limiter in the master, which is a nice thing, to get an idea how it maybe sounds in or after the mastering. Nothing wrong with it. The only wrong thing is if I get exactly that track. So it's nice to get the mix without the limiter and the mix with the limiter. So because then I know what you listen to while mixing it.
In like if you use Ableton or something like that, if you talk about Headroom, is the Headroom -3 dB inside of the master, or is the Headroom -3 dB inside of the line mixer? Because I've noticed that when you use Ableton, you can push it into the red without it really sounding bad if you use the line, but if you use the master, it starts to, of course, clip.
I mean the master. That it doesn't clip in the individual tracks is also part of the floating point mixing technology in Ableton, because you have theoretical and unlimited dynamic. In the real world, there is no floating point processing. Yeah. Yeah.
If you put a normal mixer in the red, it will sound, of course, if it's analog, it will sound warm if you have a nice mixer. But
yeah, there you have saturation that
yeah,
you
exactly.
that you doesn't have in the digital domain without applying some digital processing.
Yeah, exactly.
So emulation to it.
So that makes me sound or feel less bad when I hit my normal lines in the red, at least.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's also a big difference between digital domain and analog domain when it's about level and also loudness and stuff like that. So in the digital domain, I have mine. I have as my maximum level 0 dB full scale is called. So it's just there's nothing over it because there is no actual word to describe this in the digital domain. So it's just distortion. But in the analog domain, that's the nice stuff, you have much more level than this. Of course, if you want to have a nice amount of saturation, means nothing else than harmonic distortion. So in the real world, it's that when I get a really loud track in the computer, I can make it even louder on the vinyl, theoretically. On the other hand, I don't have to push my track in the digital domain that much, because when it goes, now I'm talking about vinyl, because when it goes to vinyl, I have these, much more headroom. So I can translate the whole dynamic at a higher level to the analog media. And that's the problem in the digital domain with digital files and CD. There it's not possible, of course. And when the ceiling is 0 dB FS, I have to decrease the dynamic. Yeah, because I can't translate the whole thing into the analog domain. When there is MP3 involved, when it's about delivering tracks, people send me 24-bit wave files, and then I thought during the processing, so something is strange here. Something is really strange. And then I found out it's just converted MP3s. I mean, in hip-hop, I had that in the 90s quite often. I think it was just because of the way they're working. So somebody is making the beats, and the other one is making the vocals, and it's nice, but they sent maybe just the vocals as MP3 and never changed it, and things like that. And it's just a nice example of actually of how it sounds, showing the actual track, and showing the artifact. The interesting thing is that I think it doesn't sound really bad, but that actually is what's in the track. So when you try to make nice, the hi-hat's nice, all the trebles nice, you just get this. That's everything which is in the stereo image, and that's just not nice.
So what did you do?
Yes.
That's what the file that you got delivered, or?
Yes, yeah. Just it's just a nice example to show how it sounds. If you maybe think, my high encoded MP3 isn't too bad, it's maybe okay for mastering, yeah. But everything comes out. Yes.
Watch those files.
Yeah, watch your files anyway. I mean, it's the point is that go into details before delivering the files, because at the mastering stage, everything comes up. If there is from vocals a pop sound, now we have a pop schutz, and stuff like that, or a digital glitch. There so often after situation that we sit in a session, and then you master the stuff, and later on you recognize that there is some strange things coming up which nobody heard before, and so listen closely, go into the details, maybe use headphones, listen loud. Maybe that's also maybe a good idea about the limiter. So at the end, before delivering, to get everything up, to listen if there is something bad, bad edits and stuff like that.
And maybe you'll stick around later on and listen to some of the tunes that were submitted, and then people can come up to you as well.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe going a little bit further to the vinyl part of the mastering.
We always have to emphasize this night is called CDR, but we still love vinyl and buy it as well.
Maybe some of you knows that a low frequency signal has a long waveform, a high frequency signal has a short waveform. I said no wavelength. This also is kind of similar to what you see in the waveform in the computer. And this is kind of a representation of the actual groove. So a bass signal results in a long waveform, means it takes a lot of space on the disk, and a high frequency signal needs less space on the disk. You will see further that especially high frequencies are difficult to play back. I have also an example with a dubplate I cut later on. The system we are working with is a Neumann VMS 70, so which consists of the actual cutting lathe and the processing unit. This is some of the details of the machine. This is one machine from Deutsche Grammophon we got in the late 90s.
Maybe you can explain how that works. I'm
Yes,
not sure if everyone has seen how a dubplate is cut.
I go into, because actually here you see the cutter head. So this is similar to the pickup of the turntable. The cutter head consists of the actually cutting stylus, and driven by two coils for each side, so left and right. And so it's the opposite, because the pickup translate the wiggling of the groove into a current, which result in an electrical signal, which is translated by the loudspeaker later on. This is nothing else than, you can say, a microphone, where the coils are something like the membrane, which drives the actual cutting stylus, depending on the signal which is fed into. That's the other machine from Motown in Detroit. This is how the groove looks like under the microscope. So here you can kind of see what I try to explain with the wavelengths. Unfortunately, just at the left corner here, you can see that's a low frequency signal, and that here it's a really high frequency signal. So you can imagine yourself that this is much easier to play back by the pickup than this one. So you need a really good pickup to play these small excursions. And this is a nice picture. Yeah.
An electron microscope.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes. And here you can also view into the groove. And here you can see, for example, at the left side you have more level than on the right side. And that's actually the chip which is cut out of the groove. So after cutting a lacquer disc, I have to inspect the groove for damages, if the stylus is damaged or something like this, if the groove is intact, if there are cross cuts, things like that, because actually you can see how the groove sounds. This is the moment where I engraved the catalog number into. Maybe some people don't care about what's in the laid out groove, and some people are totally curious about, so if there is a message and who's cutting it and blah blah blah. It's always a nice thing if people do vinyl and have an idea, some nice thing they can do in the lead out groove.
You can draw a little butterfly or something.
Yeah, for example. So when the record has been cut, it comes in a box and will be sent to the pressing plant. Vinyl cake in the pressing plant, 130 gram, which is used to press the actual record in the pressing plant. Now we are here at the cutting stage, and then the lacquer disc goes into the pressing plant. There it gets cleaned, and it gets a silver coating. Then it gets into a galvanic bath, where there is current gets onto the lacquer disc. So it gets kind of a magnetic effect, you can say. So there is inside this bath there are nickel nuggets, and out of these nickel nuggets they will produce a layer on the surface of this silver disc now, which results in the metal father, which is a negative. Then in the next step, it's a similar step as the one before. You get the metal mother, which results later on in the actual stamper. At this stage, you are actually ready to press the disc. So there are many stages which can cause flaws and problems and stuff like that.
But that's then, after that, you get the test pressings to check.
Yes, and then people ask, right. So why is it sounding, as it sounds, good or bad?
Why is my needle skipping?
Yes, for example. And then there are several reasons because of the cutting, a wrong setting of the turntable, which is quite often the case. Sometimes it's also a problem with the pressing itself. All these kind of stuff you have to know about. And then you
have to do everything all over again, or you analyze which...
It depends. You talk to the pressing plant if they can do something about it. Of course, at first I have to get the test pressings to inspect them myself, to make some tests, look at them through the microscope, putting them to my worst case scenario setup, I always call it. So a bad pickup with a wrong setting to see how it really works, because I make test cuts before I actually cut the record, and it doesn't make sense, for example, for a club tune when I check the test cut with a high-end system and the best needle you can get, because nobody will play this record with this setup. On the opposite side, of course, for jazz record or classical records, I don't have to check it on a Technics turntable with a DJ pickup. But now let's get back to the club record. This I have to check on the real world setup. And I know a lot of DJs which use, for example, a wrong anti-skating setting, means the anti-skating set to 0 because of the back cueing. It's easier, but that means that later on the record tends to skip. Maybe I can also I don't know if my record I cut skip when I put on the wrong setting, but maybe you realized that yourself.
So your recommendation is?
The setting of the turntable.
Might take a bit too long, but maybe just.
No, it's quite easy. I mean, when we talk about the anti-skating, it should have the same setting than the actual tracking force, and the tracking force, of course, should fit to the actual used pickup. I'm not a friend of putting the tracking force to 5 grams. Sometimes it's necessary if you play in a club where the table with the turntables on it is difficult.
But then you can only play your records 10 times maybe, and then...
That's the point. You really carve the groove, or actually the highs, out.
But you brought an example as well where you can hear the differences on the vinyl, where if it's pressed, like the pressing in the middle of the vinyl and the outside of the vinyl.
There's a loss of highs towards the inner diameter of the record because of the difficult groove geometry, depending also from the used pickup. So if you have a bad pickup, there will be more loss of high frequencies and also distortions. If you have a good pickup, it will be less. So let's play the record maybe. Actually, I cut 2 tracks at the outer diameter at 33 and 45 RPM, and the same 2 tracks at the inner diameter at 33 at 45 RPM. So you kind of can recognize the difference between 33 and 45 and between the outer diameter and the inner diameter. This effect, to me, is mostly about the highs. So the perception, the ability to play back the highs, but between 33 and 45, also about the bass. You have to imagine that at every track I cut here, it's all the same signal, all the same grooves, everything. It's just about the groove geometry. So let's listen to it. This one? Same speed in a diameter.
So there's a huge loss of the highest there, right?
Let's go back. That's at 33. Let's get to the other track.
So the difference is only outside and inside of the record, which is quite amazing, I think, the difference.
Yes. And usually when you have one track per side or when you have an album, then anyway, you don't recognize it because it's just at this track in the inner, so you have not the possibility to realize it. But if there's one track spread over the whole side and you would skip, you recognize this. I remember back in the 90s, it was like always cut as loud as possible. My record should be louder than any other record. And the problem that towards the inner diameter there is a loss of highs was kind of nice because it helps you mixing one track into the other. It's like a filter. That was really interesting because then in, I don't know, 2003, 4, 5, it seems like a new generation went in, and there you get calls like, oh, I played the record in the club and it's much too loud. And it's like, hey, it's a feature, not a bug. And so you started to get two types of clients. The ones which kind of old school, so yeah, as loud as possible, and the other one, no, I want to have the perfect quality over the whole side. And of course, it also depends again on the music. I mean, for a more jazzy record, pop record, it shouldn't be like that. Just also for you to know when you cut your record, where we then also come to side lengths and possibilities, to cut at 45 at maybe a lower level, but at the end, I mean, you have all this, you can crank up the stuff, but then it sounds really nice. Instead of having a loud cut at 33 because the side length is too long and it sounds just not nice, or at least not as nice as it could be. That's also back to arrangement of your track when it's about club music or also albums lately. For a good club tune, at 45 the maximum running time is about 10 minutes. At 33 it's about between 12 and 14 minutes, but 12 minutes would be nice to get the best out of it. Just yesterday I cut a 13-minute record at 45. It just sounds nicer and there were a lot of highs onto it. Okay. For an album, you can cut over 30 minutes, but then it gets really quiet, thin grooves, and later on you have not that much fun, but it's possible, and really depends also from the material. The thing with the maximum running time, it really always depends on how much space, how much stereo image you have, how much level you want to have on the record. So that's also something you have to think about while doing the sequencing. Different from the 80s and 90s, unfortunately nowadays people have a track listing, track 1 to 10, for CD and digital, and then just split it between track 5 and 6 for the vinyl. I mean, most of the cases it can work, but maybe you recognize when you put out, play some records from the 70s, 80s, that in the inner diameter there are always the ballads or the a cappella or some soft songs because of the phenomenon I described here. So it doesn't make sense when you have a track listing like I talked about, that track 5 is really the hit, or it's a track where all the instruments are in, and which is sonically really problematic because it doesn't translate to vinyl.
So you always have to cut your good tunes on the outside of the record.
We should maybe do a second workshop some other time.
Yes, please.
Super interesting, very interesting. Thanks a lot.